So around 2 months ago, I uploaded a video titled Storylines I'd Want to See in the DCU. I asked you guys if you wanted to see a part 2, and most of you said yes. So for this video, I have added 10 additional stories that I want to see adapted into the DCU. Now, because the last part 2 I uploaded on this channel did not do very well, I decided to combine part 1 and part 2 into this video into a massive supercut video. So I think this is going to be my longest video. I'm not really sure. But for those of you that already saw my part 1, the new storylines I'm talking about are going to be first. So the first half of the video is going to be the new content. And then for those of you that have never seen my channel before, this is the first time you've seen this video, you can stay for the entire video where I talk about 20 storylines overall I'd want to see in the DCU. So effectively, this is like a supercut video. But yeah, there will be 20 storylines in total in this video, 10 new ones. And yeah, I'm totally yapping at this point. Remember to leave a like and sub. It helps the channel out a ton. And let's just get right into the video. So starting off this list, we have one of DC's best duos, Batman and Superman, the world's finest. So this is one of, if not the most beloved duo in all of DC Comics, and that's for a lot of reasons. For one, they're two of the most popular characters in modern fiction, and have each had countless iconic stories in their own right, but when they come together as the world's finest, there's something about the contrast in either character's personality that makes them a really compelling team-up. You have Superman, who is this bright, positive symbol of hope, and you have Batman, who is this grounded, much darker character. When they come together, it meshes really well. So I'm kind of cheating with this one because I don't actually have a specific story, but I don't think it would be hard to find one. One of the best comic books being published by DC is World's Finest by Mark Waid and Dan Mora. Dan Mora left the series like a little while ago, but still, I think like the first 30 issues were drawn by Dan Mora, and he's my favorite artist in DC right now. But nonetheless, it's an ongoing series that started a few years ago that follows the team-ups of Batman and Superman in what is supposed to be DC's Silver Age. And when I say Silver Age, I mean like older comic books. I think the Silver Age started in 1956 and it ended in like the late 70s or early 80s. But yeah, the tone is pretty lighthearted and it deals with a lot more comic booky Silver Age stuff, which I think could be fun for a World's Finest movie. I did have a small idea for a World's Finest movie in my Superman Saga video, so if you want a better idea on what I would do for the story, go check that out. My point with putting the World's Finest on here is that there are so many different directions you could go for a full story. You could do a more cosmic scale villain like Brainiac, Eclipso, Mongol, or you could go terrestrial like a Lex Luthor and Joker team up or an Amazo movie. James Gunn has also stated that he is writing a Superman sequel of sorts, and I think when he says of sorts, I'm like 90% sure that that means it's going to be a Batman and Superman team up movie. Whether or not this movie would come out before Batman's DCU solo outing debut in The Brave and the Bold is a different question entirely, but I would love to see Batman and Superman team up on the big screen, and I know we already saw that in Batman vs. Superman, but that was at the end of the movie, and it kind of felt like they were doing it out of necessity rather than actually like wanting to work together and become friends and teammates. Also, the whole Martha scene in Batman vs. Superman is really dumb, and overall, I'm not a huge fan of that movie. I didn't hate it like a lot of people did, but I would love to see an interpretation of Batman and Superman where they are actually friends and Batman's not actually trying to kill Superman. So yeah, overall, I would love to see a World's Finest movie in the DCU. So next up, let's talk about Wonder Woman. And for Wonder Woman, I would love to see Wonder Woman The Circle adapted into a movie. So Wonder Woman The Circle was the arc that kicked off Gail Simone's run on Wonder Woman. The Circle refers to a group of 4 elite Amazonian warriors on Themyscira that swore to protect Queen Hippolyta. However, they were fanatical about the traditions of Themyscira and found out that Queen Hippolyta wanted to be a mother. So when Hippolyta was involved with the gods in crafting a child out of clay, the Circle attempted to betray Hippolyta and take out the baby, for lack of better wording, viewing Hippolyta's desire to have a child as an abomination that would one day bring about the end of Themyscira. Before they can get their hands on baby Diana, however, they're stopped and imprisoned on Themyscira for a very long time. Eventually, much later down the line, the Circle are freed from the prison by allies of Captain Nazi, and they immediately resume their mission to kill Wonder Woman. In my opinion, this is one of Wonder Woman's most underrated stories. I feel like it doesn't get talked about enough, and I think it would serve as a good first adaptation of her character in the DCU. Also, with the adaptation of the Paradise Lost show being a Game of Thrones-esque show leading up to Diana's birth, I think you could first introduce the Circle in that show, flesh out their backgrounds and motivations, and then end the show with them being imprisoned. Then you kick off the Wonder Woman film with them being released and resuming their mission to take her out. I'll talk more about that in my How I Would Do Wonder Woman in the DCU video, but that's pretty much the general idea of how I'd introduce her character. I'd love to see this story in the DCU, and it's one that we haven't seen adapted yet. Bringing us on to Green Lantern, let's talk about the culmination of Geoff Johns' Green Lantern run, Blackest Night. So Blackest Night is a massive event that was released in the late 2000s. In Geoff Johns' Green Lantern run, he introduced all these different colored lantern corps. The Green Lanterns have always represented willpower, but they were the only corps that existed for a long time. In Geoff Johns' run on the Green Lanterns, he introduced the emotional spectrum, where different colors of lantern rings represented different emotions. For example, red for rage, yellow for fear, orange for avarice, and more. Throughout the run, there are mentions of the Blackest Night prophecy, and it goes like this. After the brightest day comes the blackest night. When the dark power rises to claim the light, all who hold the emotional spectrum shall unite to stop the darkness and save the light. Wow, I read that like a total robot. Anyway, the main antagonist of the Blackest Night storyline are the Black Lanterns, an at the time undiscovered lantern corps representing death. The avatar of the Black Lanterns is a character named Necron, a being that wishes to return the universe to complete blackness. He sends a herald or prophet, I guess you could say, a man by the name of William Hand, otherwise known as Black Hand. He's essentially what Hal Jordan is to the Green Lantern Corps, but for the Black Lanterns, and yeah, he is really evil. The Black Lanterns are extremely powerful and are capable of resurrecting the dead as Black Lanterns. At the time of the story, there were a lot of dead heroes that were resurrected as Black Lanterns, and their numbers grew to make them obscenely powerful. This story is really cool because it focuses on all the Lantern Corps having to put their differences aside and come together to stop the ultimate threat. You get team-ups you'd never thought you'd see, like Sinestro working with the Green Lanterns again, as well as some other crazy collaborations. Another thing I love about this story is that the different DC characters get sorted into Lantern Corps, and most of them make so much sense. For example, Scarecrow becomes a Yellow Lantern of Fear, which is just perfect. There's a bunch of other great heroes or villains turned lantern moments in the book though. I just don't want to ruin them in case you want to read it. Like seriously, some of these heroes that get sorted into Lantern Corps make so much sense, and I won't say any more in case you haven't read the story, but some of them are perfect and just awesome. I think if you're going to adapt the Lanterns in the DCU, this has to be the endgame that you build towards. It is the ultimate culmination of the emotional spectrum story arcs, and to this day I don't think there's been a better ultimate threat to the Green Lanterns. I think a cool way to do it would be to do a part 1 with a Green Lantern film and then have a part 2 be a Justice League film. Either way, I think this would be a really cool story to see in live action, and I think most Green Lantern fans would agree this is something we need at some point. Honestly though, I would hold off from doing it. I would probably do at least 2 Lantern movies after the Lantern show just so that you can set up the prophecy and build towards it. And also, one of the big things in the comic book story is that lots of dead heroes get resurrected as Black Lanterns. I think it would be really interesting to wait for years, like way down the line in the DCU, and then have some of the characters that we've seen die over the years come back as Black Lanterns. I think that'd be really fun to see. But yeah, this is one of my favorite Green Lantern stories. It's actually my second favorite story. I'd probably say Sinestro Corps War is my favorite, but nonetheless, I would love to see the entire emotional spectrum arc in the DCU, and I would definitely throw both Sinestro Corps War and Blackest Night in there as movies, not TV shows. I think the budget for both of them would be way too high to just release on HBO Max. But anyway, I'm rambling. My point is, I would love to see the Black Lanterns and the Blackest Night storyline in the DCU in some capacity. Next on this list, we have Superman Warworld. So Superman Warworld is a 2022 story written by Philip Kennedy Johnson, and it's one of the best stories published in recent Superman history, in my opinion. The story kicks off with a group of refugees landing on Earth that speak an ancient Kryptonian dialect. Superman is the only one that can understand them, and eventually it's revealed that they are Philosians, an ancient Kryptonian offshoot race that left Krypton before its destruction to explore the cosmos. When discovered, the Philosians are bound by chains that dampen their Kryptonian powers. Even Superman feels the effects of these chains as it dampens his powers as well. Eventually, Mr. Terrific and Superman work together and discover that the chains originate from a planet called Warworld, ruled by a tyrannical dictator named Mongol. Warworld is not really a planet, it's more so a satellite that Mongol discovered and made his own. Like I mentioned already, Mongol is a tyrant. He rules over Warworld with an iron fist, and the reason the planet is called Warworld is because the planet is pretty much a giant gladiator arena. Mongol finds species all around the galaxy and brings them to Warworld, where they're forced to compete in gladiator death matches. There's no freedom on this planet. Even if you win, you're either forced to compete again or be part of Mongol's regime. In this story, Superman assembles a team to go to Warworld and liberate its people. It's a great story for Superman because it shows how great he is as a leader, not just a hero. Warworld has a red sun, meaning that it affects the Kryptonians differently than the Earth's sun, which is yellow, by severely dampening their powers. Because of this, Superman is not as overpowered as he usually is, and I think this is a really good story for Superman because it shows he's more than just his powers. He's an excellent leader and very good at inspiring hope. I've mentioned this in my last video as well, where I discuss how I do my Superman saga, but Mongul and Warworld are the perfect Superman villains. Mongul crushes all hope on his planet, most are enslaved or forced to serve his regime in some way, so when Superman shows up and leads a rebellion and inspires hope throughout the planet, it's a perfect illustration of why Superman is looked up to the way he is. It's an awesome story and I'd love to see it at some point in James Gunn's DCU. Probably a lot later on, but nonetheless it would be awesome to see. And if you ever meet somebody that says Superman is way too overpowered and that he's boring because of it, I would suggest recommending this story to them because this shows that he's not just this brute who can destroy everything because he's unbeatable. Like this story, he is mortal because his powers are so dampened, and that's part of why I love this story so much. It shows that Superman is more than just his powers. I think I've said that like 3 times already, but yeah, I really do love this story and I would love to see it in a movie form in the DCU. Next up, let's talk about The Flash, and for The Flash, I'd love to see the storyline Blitz adapted. So Blitz is an arc in Jeff Johns' Flash run that introduces a new Reverse Flash, that being Hunter Zolomon. Hunter Zolomon was the best friend of the Flash, Wally West. He worked at the Central City Police Department and often helped Wally solve crimes and put criminals away. Eventually, Wally trusted Hunter enough to reveal his secret identity to him, only strengthening their trust and friendship. At one point, however, Hunter came across Gorilla Grodd in an altercation. As a result, he lost the use of his legs and could no longer walk. He begged Wally to go back in time and prevent the accident from happening, but Wally refused. This angered Hunter, who felt that Wally had never felt true suffering or pain. He felt betrayed that Wally wouldn't help him regain the use of his legs. So he took matters into his own hands. At night, he went to the Flash Museum and attempted to use the cosmic treadmill to go back in time. However, it exploded, resulting in him gaining super speed powers. Hunter now had the ability to walk again, but he wanted to get revenge on Wally for not helping him, so he became the second Reverse Flash, trying to help Wally become a better hero by making him go through great suffering. It's pretty sadistic, and don't get it twisted, this dude is definitely a villain, even if he doesn't see himself that way. These Reverse Flashes, man, I swear to God, they are actually some of the most vile characters in DC Comics. Like, all of them. All of them are just so out of pocket with some of the shit that they do, but I won't get into detail just in case you want to read the story for yourself. I recommend doing it. I think it's very good. But yeah, Hunter is no different from the other Reverse Flashes in that he does some pretty horrible stuff in this book. The arc is a really good read and gives Wally his own definitive Reverse Flash. I've already talked a couple of times about how I'd like to see the return of Barry Allen adapted into the DCU, but I think this could serve as a great Flash movie as well. You could set up Hunter Zolomon as an important side character and friend of Wally's in the first 2 films, have him lose his ability to walk at the end of the second film, and then go full bad guy as Reverse Flash in the 3rd film. Whatever route they go with the Flash, whether it's Barry or Wally, I think it's important to get a story where the Flash squares off with the Reverse Flash, especially because the Flash movie in 2023 took one of the Reverse Flash's most iconic storylines and did nothing with it. I also think there's a possibility that instead of adapting the return of Barry Allen for the first Flash movie or what have you, you do a story with Barry Allen facing off against his Reverse Flash being Eobard Thawne, and then later you adapt the Blitz storyline where Wally West faces off against his own Reverse Flash, Hunter Zolomon. Either way, I need a Flash movie where the Reverse Flash squares off with the Flash, and I know that it's likely to happen, but if you would have told me 5 years ago that the Flash movie was going to be based on Flashpoint, I would have immediately thought, okay, so that means the Reverse Flash is going to be the villain. I honestly can't believe that they adapted Flashpoint without the Reverse Flash. That honestly was just crazy to me, and I think the movie was missing his character quite a bit. Regardless, that movie's in the past. I'd like to forget about it, not only because I don't think it was the greatest movie, but also the controversy surrounding it. I just want a completely different take on the Flash character, and I think when they do end up making a Flash movie, and I think it's a when, not really an if, it'll probably be a couple years down the line, but I think they need to do the Reverse Flash. I think that's the villain you need to go with. I mean, you could consider Gorilla Grodd or the Rogues, but I would definitely do Reverse Flash. Bringing us on to the next character on this list, let's talk about Aquaman. It's pretty crazy. I think I've made like 21 videos on this channel, and I've never once talked about Aquaman, at least not that I can remember. Maybe I have, but I'm pretty sure I haven't. Aquaman is an interesting character to talk about for this list because he doesn't really have that many definitive stories. For the Jason Momoa films, they took heavy inspiration from Jeff Johns' New 52 run, which makes sense. It's a very good modern telling of the character, and my personal favorite Aquaman. I don't really think any Aquaman run comes close. That being said, I have not read the Aquaman Rebirth run, which I've heard very good things about, but from all the Aquaman I've read, Jeff Johns' run's my favorite. Anyway, I'm getting completely off track. So for the storyline I'd like to see adapted to the DCU, I decided to settle on my favorite Aquaman story of all time, that being Aquaman Sub Diego. I'll be pretty brief with the description of the story because there's not a lot I can say without ruining the mystery of the book. So Sub Diego is the story story of a section of San Diego that randomly just collapses into the ocean. However, most of the people involved in this disaster that sink with the city don't die. Instead, they become trapped underneath the water, being unable to come to the surface. The people that sank into the ocean can no longer breathe air, but have mysteriously adapted the ability to breathe underwater. So Aquaman sets out to find out why the city sank, who is behind the genetic alterations of these people, and what he can do to help them. It's one of my favorite Aquaman stories of all time, and honestly, if Aquaman is getting his own project in the DCU at some point, I definitely expect this story to be adapted. It's a great story of his that we haven't seen adapted in any form up to this point. I also think that they're definitely not going to be doing the whole Aquaman origin story again. I think that telling that story one time is enough, so I think you go into the DCU with him established as the Atlantean king, but then he shows his humanity by helping out the people of Sub Diego that have fallen into the ocean and now are basically trapped underwater and have to adapt to the underwater lifestyle. I think that Aquaman showing his humanity and helping these people would be a really cool story to see on screen. Also, I'm gonna say this with like every story on this list, but I definitely recommend you go read this book. It's my favorite Aquaman story of all time. I would just love to see it adapted. Next up, let's talk about Green Arrow. And for this video, we're gonna be talking about Green Arrow, the Longbow Hunters. The Longbow Hunters is a revolutionary story for the Green Arrow mythos written by Mike Grell. It follows Oliver Queen and Dinah Lance moving to Seattle and taking a much more grounded approach to crime fighting. Gone are the days of Oliver using boxing glove and trick arrows. This is a much more grounded approach to crime fighting where he uses a longbow as his weapon of choice. He deals with very grounded and real issues in this story and takes a much more violent approach to dealing with criminals. The villains he deals with in this run are very violent, such as serial killers and criminal organizations. It's not the usual Oliver dealing with supervillains story and is a much more realistic approach to crime fighting. If this ended up being a storyline in the DCU, I think it would look something like the Netflix Daredevil show. A grounded noir crime drama focused on Green Arrow and Black Canary moving to a city and dealing with new threats. If I were to change anything about the story though, I'd probably change Black Canary's arc just a little bit. Nothing too crazy, but I would definitely have her be a co-lead rather than just a love interest. Okay, she's not just a love interest, she is definitely utilized as a main character in the original story, but she's definitely still a secondary character to Green Arrow. We never really got a proper adaptation of Dinah Lance in the Arrow show, so it would be a shame if she was sidelined or a side character in a project. I would definitely want her and Ollie to have equal lead roles if this were to be adapted. Well, not even just this story, any story. I would love for the title of the show or movie to be Green Arrow and Black Canary. Like, I think their duo should be the focus of the film and not just a Green Arrow centric story. Like, I love Black Canary just as much as I love Oliver Queen. I think they are both some of the best characters in the DC Comics universe. At least that's my opinion, but I think they're very compelling as a duo. Nonetheless, in my opinion, this is the definitive run on Green Arrow, and I'd love to see it get a proper adaptation. It could be one of the more realistic parts of the DCU, and it would be cool to see Green Arrow in a street level setting again. Definitely go check out Mike Grell's run on Green Arrow. It's actually a run that I read pretty recently. Like I said, it's my definitive run on Green Arrow. It is my favorite adaptation of the character. But yeah, let's move on to the next character and storyline. Next up, let's talk about my favorite superhero team, the Justice Society. For the JSA, I went through a lot of stories, and I'm not gonna lie, I couldn't really pick one to decide on. I just ended up deciding on a general idea. For an adaptation of the JSA and the DCU, I would love for them to adapt a World War II JSA story in some capacity. Bring the Golden Age JSA together and show them as the first large-scale superhero team-up in DCU history. I think you go with Alan Scott, Jay Garrick, the original Atom, the original Starman, Our Man, Mr. Terrific, and Dr. Fate. I also think at some point during the movie, you introduce the DCU's adaptation of Wonder Woman. Obviously, Diana was a vital part of the Second World War in DC history, and I think her being part of the first team in the DCU's history would be really cool to see. Also, because in the comics, she is part of the JSA and does fight alongside them in World War II, so I think it would be really cool to adapt that into the DCU's timeline and history. It would be cool to see the JSA take on the Nazis in a World War II setting, and I think a villain like Vandal Savage would be cool to see them go up against. Vandal Savage is immortal, so it would be interesting to see him in multiple different eras in the DCU. He isn't just a one-off villain, so you could have him be defeated by the JSA, but then return decades later to face off against the Justice League. I also think a World War II JSA movie perfectly sets up a sequel based on James Robinson's The Golden Age, which is one of my favorite JSA stories, so there's that as well. And if you guys have been watching the channel for a long time, this is my favorite team in the DCU. I do prefer the modern version of the team. The JSA from The Golden Age is also a really compelling team, and I also think you can't do the modern JSA without telling the story of the Golden Age JSA. It just wouldn't make a lot of sense to me. So yeah, I would love to see the JSA get their own World War II movie, and maybe even a sequel that would be based on James Robinson's The Golden Age story, but that might be asking for too much. If we could just get one JSA movie, I would be really happy. So up next we have the Teen Titans, and for the Titans, I chose Teen Titans: The New Blood by Jeff Johns. So this is a story that was part of Jeff Johns' Teen Titans run from the early 2000s. It reintroduced Brother Blood and his cult called the Church of Blood. Brother Blood is a title passed down generations, and it is the name given to the leader of the Church of Blood. A very twisted cult that believes in things I probably can't even talk about in a YouTube video, but the general idea is that they're very violent. In this story, the new Brother Blood is even more twisted compared to his predecessors. He has an obsession with Raven and believes it is his destiny to marry her. It is also his goal to set Trigon free. And for those of you that don't know, Trigon is Raven's very evil father. He's kind of like the devil, but there's also a devil that's different from Trigon, so it's like, I'm not even gonna get into all that right now. If you know who Trigon is, you know who Trigon is. The story is pretty high stakes and ties in a lot to Raven's backstory, and I think it would be a good storyline to see adapted if they end up doing a Titans trilogy. You could have this as the second film, having Trigon be resurrected by the end of the film, and then have the Titans face off with Trigon for the third film. Although now that I'm saying that out loud, that sounds like a Justice League threat, but regardless, seeing both Brother Blood and Trigon face off with the Titans would be a direction I'd like to see in the DCU. But yeah, I think a movie focusing on this storyline would flesh out the character of Raven really nicely. Flesh out. That's kind of funny. I'm gonna definitely cut that out. And I think it would be better than just seeing a straight up Titans Trigon adaptation like we saw in the show. I think we just want to differentiate from that a little bit. Let's build it up by first introducing Brother Blood, and then through that we see Trigon, and through Raven we see Trigon. Overall, Raven would be like a main character of the story if this were adapted into a movie. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think she's a really cool character. And yeah, I think overall this is a really cool story, and I think it would be a good story to see on screen. Next, let's talk about the Justice League. And for the League, I'd love to see Grant Morrison's opening arc of his JLA run, Justice League New World Order. This is the beginning to one of the most iconic Justice League runs of all time, written by Grant Morrison. The run features the revitalization of the Big Seven, that being Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, Aquaman, and Martian Manhunter. This arc introduces a new superhero team calling themselves the Hyper Clan, a team that came from a planet that destroyed themselves and are here to save the Earth. Obviously, something is very off about this team, as they seem too good to be true, and I'll give a quick spoiler warning before I tell you who the Hyper Clan really are. Well, it turns out that the Hyper Clan are actually white Martians attempting to conquer Earth, first by turning the public on its heroes and then striking when they least expect it. This is what I consider to be a pretty good origin story for the Justice League. It's also pretty similar to the opening arc in the Justice League animated series, and I think it serves well as something that brings all the heroes together. I think a mix of the New World Order storyline from the comics and the white Martian invasion arc from Justice League would serve as a really interesting first Justice League movie in the DCU. You could have them infiltrating top levels of government and agencies, and have Batman and the Justice League try to piece together the puzzle of what is really going on. I know the current rumor is that the first Justice League film in the DCU will be heavily inspired by Darwin Cook's The New Frontier, but I don't really know how anybody could know that. We haven't even got the first film in this universe, so I don't think anybody really knows what's going on, and especially with people saying like, well, this reputable scooper scooped it. Honestly, nowadays, I feel like a reputable scooper means somebody who shoots with 60% accuracy, and even the reputable scoopers are getting stuff so wrong nowadays, and it's just like, I don't really know what to believe. And we haven't even got a Batman movie yet. We don't know who Wonder Woman's gonna be. We don't know what her movie's gonna be about. I don't think anybody really knows what the first Justice League movie in the DCU will be. Regardless, if it does end up being The New Frontier, I wouldn't be mad at all. I think it's a great story, and especially a great origin story for the origin of the Justice League coming together. But I think a New World Order arc would be really cool to see on screen. I also think it sets up Martian Manhunter really well, because obviously he has ties to the white Martians from the past with Haran Mir's curse and the destruction of the civilization on Mars and whatnot. But yeah, that's what I got for that story. So first, let's start by talking about one of the most famous Batman stories of all time, Batman Under the Red Hood. Before I go any further, I will say that I will be going over spoilers for this story. I'm guessing if you're watching, you already know what makes this story so iconic, but if not, I recommend you go check out the Under the Red Hood animated movie. In short, Batman needed a new sidekick following the departure of Dick Grayson, and eventually Jason Todd would take over as the second Robin. Jason was raised quite differently from Dick, however, growing up in in a very abusive home. Because of this, he struggled a lot controlling his anger and impulse, something that would eventually lead to his demise. One night, Jason left the country without warning, seeking a distress call from who he believed to be his mother. However, when he realized what had happened, it was already too late. It turned out that Jason's mom was actually contacting him, but that she was also working with the Joker. The Joker ended up capturing Jason and mercilessly beat him with a crowbar. When he finished, he left Jason and his mother in a warehouse rigged with explosives, and while Batman tried to save them, he didn't get there in time. This was the Death in the Family storyline, and it's one of the most infamous stories in DC Comics history. This isn't the story I want to see adapted though, I'm just giving necessary background information. The story I want to see adapted is actually Under the Red Hood. This story has been adapted a number of times, whether it was the animated film, the Arkham games, or I guess you could say Titans. Red Hood is known to be a very popular character in the Batman mythos, and for good reason. Basically, Batman begins encountering a vigilante wearing a red bat symbol and a red mask. This vigilante seemingly knows every move Batman makes before he makes it. He knows his fighting style, what strategies he's going to come up with, and it just seems like whatever Batman does, the Red Hood is a step or two ahead. It turns out that the Red Hood is actually a resurrected Jason Todd, back to get revenge on the criminal underworld of Gotham, and also to get revenge on Batman for never finishing the job of killing the Joker. This story is absolutely legendary, and I honestly can't believe it hasn't been adapted to live action yet. Yeah, I said it hasn't. It was teased in the Snyderverse, but we never got to see it, and with James Gunn confirming the Bat family will be heavily featured in his version of Batman, I really want to see this storyline unfold. We already know that the fourth Robin, Damian Wayne, is going to be featured in the first DCU Batman film, The Brave and the Bold. Because of this, we can assume that Dick Grayson was already Robin and is now Nightwing, Jason is dead, and Tim is either Robin right before the movie or just never existed. I think the first film will focus on Batman and Damian battling Talia and the League of Assassins, but I really do think the sequel should focus on adapting the Red Hood storyline. It's likely that Batman will still be recovering from the death of Jason in some way by the time Brave and the Bold comes around, and I've actually talked in a couple of videos about how I believe Talia's shocking reveal of Bruce having a son is the only way Bruce would ever take on a Robin following the death of Jason. I've said it a bunch of times, I'll say it again. I don't think that they should cut Tim Drake from the timeline, but story-wise that probably would make more sense. Regardless, seeing Bruce heal from Jason in the first film just for him to come back with a vengeance against the Bat family in the sequel, well, I think it would make for a really cool movie. Fans of DC have been wanting to see this story in live action for a while, and I think it's well overdue for an adaptation. So next up, let's talk about Superman Brainiac. This was a 2008 storyline written by Jeff Johns and featured Brainiac as the main antagonist. This story really tries to establish Brainiac as a massive threat, with the reveal that all the past encounters Superman had with Brainiac were merely just drone extensions of him, and now the true Brainiac has arrived. Brainiac's main goal is to consume knowledge. It's pretty much what he's programmed to do, and for a long time up until this story, he would even use technology to shrink cities and put them in bottles aboard his ship. Even the Kryptonian city of Condor was no match for Brainiac, as it was taken by force by him. Brainiac likes to rid the universe of civilizations, keeping the last remaining pieces of them to himself so that no one can possess the knowledge of them that he does, which is one of the motivations for why he comes to Earth in the first place. He already has the bottle city of Condor, but there are other Kryptonians that still exist in the universe. I do like this storyline a lot, but the main reason I put it on here is because in general, I would just like to see more of Brainiac. He's a great Superman villain and has yet to be featured as the main villain in a Superman film. Pretty much every iteration of Superman has featured Lex Luthor or General Zod as the main villain of the film, with the new movie being no exception as well. I think it would be nice to finally see Brainiac on the big screen, and when I think of a force that can actually match Superman, I tend to think Brainiac. He's an AI that's very capable of going toe-to-toe with Superman, and I would love to see that in either a Superman or a Justice League movie in the future. But preferably Superman, because I've always preferred him as more of a Superman villain anyway. So Wonder Woman was an interesting character to include on this list because I feel like Wonder Woman doesn't really have a definitive story or villain that immediately pops in my head. For Batman and Superman, there's quite a few stories to look to, but not so much for Wonder Woman. There is one villain that stands out among the rest for me though, and that is Cersei. I feel like if they ever put Wonder Woman on the big screen again, Cersei should be the main villain. She's tied very heavily into Wonder Woman's mythological side and actually is involved in a major storyline from the late 80s called War of the Gods. In this story, Cersei attempts to cause mass conflicts across multiple pantheons of gods: Greek, Roman, Norse, and more. Her goal is to cause all the gods to destroy each other and just overall cause chaos. I've said a couple times that I would like to see a Wonder Woman animated series in this DC universe, but I think this story would actually be well suited for a live action movie. I feel like the story is big scale enough to fit the big screen, and I think by the time a Wonder Woman movie comes out, they're going to want to go with a high stakes storyline to get people in the seats. So have Cersei manipulate the gods into fighting each other and have Wonder Woman come in and save the day. Cersei also needs redemption from her arc in Creature Commandos because she kind of just got bitched the entire season. Like, that's pretty much the only way I can put it, and I think she deserves some respect. I think they should make her either the main villain of a Wonder Woman animated series season or just a movie. But yeah, I will say again though, I would like to see a Wonder Woman animated series, so maybe we get a season or two of that before we get a War of the Gods movie. But regardless, I'd love to see this story in live action, in animation, whatever. I think we just need some Wonder Woman content because it just doesn't seem like we're going to be getting very much of it for a little while. So next up, let's talk about the Green Lanterns and a story that was my favorite DC Comics event as a kid, the Sinestro Corps War. So the Sinestro Corps War follows the story of Sinestro forming his own rival Lantern Corps to oppose the Green Lanterns. Sinestro was once one of the best Green Lanterns and actually mentored Hal Jordan. On his home planet Korrigar, however, he ruled as a dictator. This was eventually discovered by Hal Jordan and reported to the Guardians, who banished Sinestro from the Corps. While away from the Corps, Sinestro formed his own Lantern Corps, the Yellow Lanterns, whose ring powers come from the user's ability to invoke fear. He declared he would get revenge on the Green Lanterns for banishing him, which is exactly what he aimed to do in this story. The Sinestro Corps War is incredibly high stakes. Not only do the Green Lanterns meet their match in the Yellow Lanterns, who have a lot of ring wielders, but they're fighting an enemy led by somebody who used to be a Green Lantern. To this point in Green Lantern publication, this is the highest the stakes had ever been. Sinestro and Hal Jordan had been rivals to this point, but this was their biggest moment. I think it would be really cool to see their rivalry build up to this eventually, but considering we're getting 60-year-old actors to represent both Sinestro and Hal Jordan, I honestly don't think we're going to see it. There have been lots of rumors suggesting that Hal Jordan is going to die in the Lanterns show, with a sort of torch passing moment to John Stewart to then become the main DCU Green Lantern. If this happens, I think it makes a Sinestro Corps War story on the big screen less likely. The story of Sinestro's revenge and the Corps' battling is compelling, but I feel like the biggest selling point for the story is the ultimate face-off between Sinestro and Hal Jordan. I feel like without this dynamic, it overall lessens the impact of the story, but that's just my opinion. I really do hope they keep Hal alive after the first season of Lanterns because I do think he's a cool character to have around. If they do kill him off, however, this is what I think they should do. So if they do decide to kill off Hal Jordan, I would love to see the series Spectre Day of Judgment get adapted to the DCU. So in the 90s, Hal Jordan turned evil. He became the main villain of the second DC Crisis, 0 Hour: A Crisis in Time, and he did this because Coast City was destroyed by Mongol and Cyborg Superman, and Hal's response to the city's destruction was to try and just bring it back with his Green Lantern ring, like just will it back into existence, and the Guardians were very against that, and that really pissed Hal Jordan off, so he pretty much went completely crazy, wiped out the entire Green Lantern Corps, killed Sinestro, killed most of the Guardians. It's one of the most insane storylines in DC Comics history, but that's not the storyline I'm here to talk about. The storyline I'm here to talk about is what comes after, which is Day of Judgment. So the last time we had seen Hal Jordan was in 1996 in The Final Night, where he sacrificed himself to save the Earth. During Hal's absence, Kyle Rayner took up the mantle of Green Lantern, and Hal was thought to be a thing of the past. That was until Spectre Day of Judgment, where a fallen angel takes control of the Spectre and unleashes hell on Earth. The heroes realize that the Spectre definitely needs a new human host, so they grab Hal Jordan out of hell and get him to become the new Spectre. This is a really underrated and great story from DC. This is the first time we've seen Hal since he turned evil, and you get to see him reflect on his past mistakes in the story. He also takes a new approach to the spirit of vengeance, where normally the Spectre would have no mercy on wrongdoers. Hal's time as the Spectre saw him focus on redemption rather than vengeance. I really don't want to go too far into details on this story because I know it's not nearly as well known as most of the other stories on this list, but if you haven't read it, I really think that you should check it out. It is one of my favorite DC stories ever. It's very, very underrated. If we do get some crazy heel turn from Hal in the Lanterns show where he becomes Parallax, I think it would be an awesome opportunity to showcase this very good and very underrated story on the big screen. If you haven't checked this story out, I think you should. I think it definitely is not talked about enough. So next, let's talk about my favorite Flash story of all time, The Return of Barry Allen. So this storyline was written in the late 80s by Mark Waid and was one of the first major story arcs for his run on The Flash. This story was published in 1993 and featured Wally West grappling with whether or not he could live up to Barry Allen's legacy as the Flash. Wally was Barry's sidekick up until Barry's death in the Crisis on Infinite Earths event in 1984. Following this event, Wally West became the new Flash. Even in the issues leading up to this storyline, you can tell Wally feels overwhelmed with whether or not he can live up to Barry's legacy, which is why this storyline is perfect. Out of the blue, Barry Allen shows up at the Garrick household where Jay, Joan, Wally, and Linda are having dinner. He tells Wally he doesn't remember anything and that he just showed up in a random alleyway. And I will issue a spoiler warning in case you want to read this story for yourself and you don't want to know what's really going on with Barry Allen. I will say stop watching here and I'll put a timestamp where you can keep watching. Everything is good at first. Barry returns to being the Flash alongside Wally. They fight crime together together, but Wally begins realizing something is off with Barry. Eventually, Wally investigates the alleyway Barry turned up in and finds a journal. This is not the journal of Barry Allen, however, but Eobard Thawne, the Reverse Flash. It turns out that Eobard had actually gotten reconstructive surgery in the future, traveled back in time, and attempted to become the Flash of the present. However, once realizing that the Flash will eventually kill him, he attempts to destroy everything of his legacy, including killing Wally West. This leads to a final standoff between Wally and Eobard, Flash versus Reverse Flash, where Wally proves himself as the Flash, not just the sidekick. This is my favorite Flash story of all time, and if I were to pitch a Flash movie, this is what I would do. I've talked about how I do a Flash movie in the DCU before, so go check it out, but I honestly just really think it's time we see Wally West on the big screen. We've seen Barry get a massive show and his own movie at this point, and I think it's time we show Wally some love. Alright, so next let's talk about the Teen Titans, and for the Titans, I chose the Judas contract as a story I'd like to see. I will say though, kind of similarly to Brainiac, I more so picked this story because I just want to see a Titans movie with Deathstroke as the main villain, especially because there are some elements of this story that I think most people would like to forget about. Regardless, the Judas contract is a story about the Teen Titans adding a new member by the name of Terra, but Terra ends up being a spy for the Titans' greatest enemy, Deathstroke. Deathstroke wants to capture and kill the Titans to carry out a contract left behind by his son. Hive initially hired his son to kill the Titans, but he couldn't do it, leading to Deathstroke picking up the contract for this story. I decided to throw this one in here because there is a Teen Titans movie in development, and I would honestly like to see Deathstroke more than any other villain. We've seen a lot of the Trigon stuff, and I've never really been a huge fan of it, and I'd like the first Titans movie to be at least somewhat grounded. I would also like to see the Wolfman era Titans get some love in this adaptation, and this is arguably Wolfman's most iconic story from his run on the Teen Titans. If you want to come back in the sequel and do Trigon or Brother Blood, I'm on board with that, but to start, I'd like to see Deathstroke versus the Titans. I'm a big fan of the Bat Family in DC Comics, and I feel like no story puts the Bat Family on display better than Battle for the Cowl. So this story takes place right after Final Crisis, an event where Batman was thought to have died. With Batman leaving a major void as the protector of Gotham, a couple of Batman's former sidekicks attempt to become the next Batman. Initially, the mantle is taken up by Tim Drake, who believes Bruce wanted him to become Batman after he was gone. Soon into his stint as Batman, however, he encounters a much more violent Batman who turns out to be second Robin Jason Todd. It's kind of the usual bad guy story with Jason. He believes that criminals don't deserve a second chance and should be taken out. Tim Drake tries to reason with him, but he gets beaten nearly to death by Jason. This results in Dick Grayson being forced to take up the cape and cowl and become Batman despite not wanting to. In the end, he's able to overcome Jason and become the next Batman, taking up Damian Wayne as his Robin. Also, I will say, I think the dynamic between Dick as Batman and Damian as Robin works so well. Like, I think the pairing works better than the father and son dynamic because Damian and Bruce are pretty similar attitude-wise, and I think it's nice to mix it up a little bit with Nightwing taking over as Batman and becoming a different type of role model to Damian Wayne. I think this story would be really cool to see on the big screen because you get to see what these characters become post-Batman. That isn't something that is too commonly explored by DC nowadays, and I think people would be really excited to see who the true successor to Batman is on the big screen. I would also like for Dick Grayson to have his big moment. We get to see him built up as Nightwing in the Titans films throughout the DCU before being thrust into a major leadership role after the death of Batman. Obviously, I'd want to see this story way down the line in the DCU, but it's still a story I'd want to see nonetheless. Lastly, I wanted to make sure I included a Justice League story in here, so let's talk about the Mark Waid storyline, JLA Tower of Babel. So Tower of Babel is a Justice League story that focuses on Batman's paranoia and how it can be a huge detriment to the team. In Batman's Batcave, he held contingency plans for each Justice League member if they were to go rogue. His goal was for them to only be used during an emergency, but these plans were stolen from the Batcave by Ra's al Ghul and the League of Assassins. One by one, each League member begins to get taken out in various inexplicable ways. Eventually, they are able to overcome this, but they also realize that Batman was the one who created all of these contingency plans. This obviously does not sit well with the Justice League, and while Batman maintains he didn't mean for any of this to happen, he is voted off of the Justice League. This is a classic Justice League story, and it's actually been retold in the animated film Justice League Doom. I wasn't a huge fan of it personally, but I do know there are some people that liked it. I think this would be a great ideal second Justice League movie, maybe to weaken Earth right before Darkseid arrives. The Justice League loses their leader and best strategist, while the rest of the team is weakened as a result of the events of the film. I also think this could lead nicely into Batman forming the Outsiders. In the comics, he leaves the Justice League to form the Outsiders, which is more of a Black Ops team, and I think it could be really cool to see them on the big screen as well. Anyways, guys, those are 10 storylines that I'd like to see in the DCU. Let me know if you'd want a part 2, because there are actually plenty of storylines I could think of that I'd like to see part of the DCU. This was kind of just me throwing the first ones I could think of for each character into a video, but I could definitely make more parts to this if you guys are interested. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.